Okay, so I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to today's session number 12 of our decolonial reading group. Our guest today is Professor Bethania Assy, who will be discussing Viveiros de Castro's terms Amerindian Perspectivism, Multinaturalism, and Shamanic Cosmopolitanism with us. Bethania Assy is professor of philosophy of law, both in the Department of Law at the Universidade do Estado do Rio de Janeiro and at the Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Rio de Janeiro, where she coordinates the Center of Human Rights. Bethania first studied in Pernambuco and then wrote her PhD at the New School in New York City. She presides the UNESCO Chair Program Unit WIN, titled Human Rights, Violence, Government, and Governance. And the program is led by PUC Rio in partnership with universities in Colombia, Spain, Brazil, France, and Italy, and is sponsored by the Programme Régional de Coopération Universitaire France, Amérique Latine, Caraïbes, called PREFALC. Bethania has written innumerable articles, essays, book chapters, and books, many of them on the decolonization of human rights, as well as on an Antropophilosophia decolonial in Viveiros de Castro, but also on current events in Brazil, on Agnes Hella, and on Hannah Arendt. For example, she co-edited a book titled Direitos Humanos, Justiça, Verdade e Memória. Her book Ética, Responsabilidade e Juízo em Hannah Arendt was published by Perspectiva in 2015 and translated into Italian, and her biography of Hannah Arendt was translated into English and published at Lang Verlag in Frankfurt am Main as Hannah Arendt and Ethics of Personal Responsibility. So, Bethania, thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights on Viveiros de Castro with us. It really is a pleasure and an honor to have you in this group today, and we are very much looking forward to the discussion with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a nice opportunity to share those reflections with such a wonderful reading group. I wish I could participate in more regular basis. Katarina, thank you for your amazing job and for your generosity. And I also want to thank Antonio Pelli, who first mentioned this group, my dear friend Antonio, and say hello to everyone who's here today. What I'm going to do is just a kind of a preliminary step of a broader investigation on perspectivism as a philosophical project. It's how I take it. But today I will offer only what we call the basis of Viveiros thought. I will try to make it really short in less than 30 minutes. And just to facilitate you guys to engage with the Viveiros grammar, which is usually not so easy for us Occidental minds, no? And I want to give a quick note. I think it's important. I am completely aware of the crucial critical dimension of decolonization. So I'm not diminish the critical aspect, but today I want to emphasize rather the propositive aspect of colonization, what we have to offer. And that I think that's the main point of this discussion today. And I begin with a quotation from Viveiro himself, who says anthropology is ready to fully assume its true mission, that of being a theory practice of permanent decolonization of thought. It's with these quotation marks that I want to introduce our conversation today. And just for those who are not familiar with Viveiros de Castro's work, he has worked in many articles, but those are the three books who we can say that in which his philosophy is actually based. Metaphysics Canibais was the last one, was considered to be the most philosophical and kind of make the argument even shorter. And in related with, just to give you a very brief sketch of his theoretical framework, Viveiros' work having as a starting point, of course, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Blum Latour, but also Gilles Deleuze and Roy Wagner and Philippe Decolonizing. Those anthropologists are very important to help us to understand how the Viveiros work are based in terms of philosophy. In terms of the indigenous communities in which Viveiros really work really close, I introduce you to the Arauete. The Arauete was first contacted in 1976. They are located in Bacajá River, is the direction of Xingu. They are part of Tupi-Guarani people, of hunters and farmers, and they now are currently located in what we call the Middle Xingu. It's interesting to show a picture of the first contact of Viveiros with the Arauete community was in 1981, and the last visit on the way around, they visit Viveiros in São Paulo in 2015. This is Viveiros and the Arauete people. And I need also to give just some clues for those who are not familiar with the animals the Arauete often refers to. The queixada, I myself had, for the first time that I was introduced into his thinking, I had to figure out what the jaguar was or what the guariba or queixada was. Those are the main animals they refer to. And our idea today, from taking the thinking of Viveiros de Castro, is that the Arauete experience could be what we call decoded through two main, what I would say, anthropo-philosophical concepts: perspectivism and multinaturalism. I have to say that all the pictures that you see of indigenous are really from the Arauete, not the sketches, but the pictures. And I need to give you two preliminary remarks. First, perspectivism. This is a kind of concept which is quite common to many of the indigenous people in the Latin America, according to which the world is inhabited by different species of subjects or people, human and no human, who apprehend the world according to different points of view. So, Viveiros de Castro invite us to think over the predicates subsuming in the two paradigmatic terms that traditionally opposes each other under the labels of nature. Sorry, just to... The labels nature and culture, such as the universal versus the particular, objective versus subjective, physical versus moral, fact versus values, immanence versus transcendence, body versus spirit, animality versus humanity. He suggests that multinaturalism is capable of one of the constructive features of Native American thought in relation to modern multiculturalistic cosmology. So to challenge those dualisms, Viveiros offer us multinaturalism in opposition to multiculturalism. We'll go very briefly to that, just to show you guys how would be different taking the perspective of multinaturalism. Usually multiculturalism means multi-involvement between uniqueness of nature and multiplicity of culture. This is quite common to our minds, think in those terms, and then subsume that that relation is guaranteed by the objective universality of bodies and substance. So, if we take the Amerindian multiculturalism, we would presume that it could be completely the opposite. It would imply the unity of the spirit and the diversity of bodies. culture or the subject would be the form of the universal, and nature or the object would be the form of the particular. We'll come back to that later. So, this nature culture distinction must be criticized through Viveiros de Castro's perspectivism, but not in the sense that the idea is to conclude that such a thing does not exist, but to challenge the dualism and the position of those two perspectivism. So, to perspectivize our differences, contrasting them with the distinctions, effectively operates in Amerindian cosmology. So, Amerindian cosmology is about perspectivization. But to understand that, we really need some preliminary remarks, because it's a completely new vocabulary, you see? So we need at least to figure out some points that I wrote down here. First of all, the idea of myth. Myth must be taken as symmetrical to Western philosophy, which is quite a challenging for us. Those narratives say and reflect on how the world is. What I mean is, the myth is not allegorical here, as we usually to take it. But myth is an attempt to explain what is the real. That's what myth is about in the Arabic cosmology. First of all, to take very seriously the idea of metamorphosis, which for them means the intrinsic ability to be something else. That's very important when we touch the topic of shamanism. Other absolute and crucial concept, the idea of affinity, the affine, someone who must be simultaneously trusted but also a potential enemy. Every becoming is an alliance, because the whole purpose of the act of giving, and that's crucial, is to force the associated, the other, to act. Force the other to extract them a gesture, to provoke a response from them. So this whole notion of affinity has to do with this kind of provoking the other to respond. The idea of a supernatural, which means the inintelligibility between worlds. The supernatural makes concept access sensitive, like our philosophical intuition, to make a parallel. The hunt is really fundamental, the symbolic valorization of hunting, the field where the relationship between humans and non-humans are related. And consequently, the predatory-prey relationship, which is also crucial, and that Viveiros developed more closely in his last book. So, with this kind of framework, what is perspectivism? No? Perspectivism, first of all, is grounded phenomenically in a numerous references in Amazonian ethnography to an indigenous conception according to which the way human beings see animals and other subjectivities that populate the universe, like gods, spirits, the dead, the inhabitants of other cosmic levels, plants, weather events, landforms, objects, and even artifacts, those are deeply different from how these beings see humans and how them see themselves. So that's the first invitation we have to take into account in order to open our mind to understand perspectivism. In the perspectivism perspective, the animals apprehend themselves as humans or become anthropomorphic when they are in their own homes and villages, and experience their own habitats and characteristics under the speech of culture. So what we have here, I mean, I put two I put two pictures that you could see in the head of the arete, white spots of feathers. No, you see this idea to get close to the representation of the animal. Oh, you see, you get to that in the when you talk about the shamanism and the body representation, how the body is really crucial here. But that structure that I just mentioned now means that in the perspectivism, the animals, and that's really crucial, see their food as human food, which means the jaguar see blood, for instance, as cauim, which is the indigenous beer. The dead see crickets as fish in the perspectivism. Vultures see rotten meat, worms, as roasted fish, and etc. The same structure goes to their bodily representation. No, the bodily attributes like feathers, peaks, and etc. as ornaments or cultural instruments. The social system is organized identically to human institutions like leaders, shamans, ceremonies, marriage rules. So this whole idea bring us then to a kind of question, and why and where does one derive that every being can potentially be a human? This is the idea of perspectivism. The first foundation is, of course, mythology. Myth tells how animals lost attributes inherited or maintained by humans, that they have this cosmovision. Humans are those who have remained equal to themselves. Animals are ex-humans for their arete, no? And not humans, that are ex-animal. Usually we think in that way. So we think that humans are ex-animals, no? For the arete, everyone was human in the beginning. And the animals, they lost not their humanity, they lost the appearance of humanity. They are covered by animal or other kind of this farce, and that is crucial for 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 what we are bringing here today. So to make it a little bit easier, our popular anthropology see humanity as standing on the foundation of animals, normally hidden by culture. So we are humans who still somehow remains with any kind of animality inside, but I mean that's humanity, a stand up animality. Indigenous thought includes, quite on the contrary, that having previously been human, animals and other beings of the cosmos remain human, even though in a non-obvious way of showing such humanity. So we will get to that a little bit further. So let me now briefly, very briefly, everything here is very briefly, just to engage in the discussion, introduce you to the notion, what I think is absolutely amazing, of shamanism. Amazonian shamanism can be defined as an ability manifested by certain individuals, not to everyone, to deliberately cross bodily borders and adopt the perspective of our specific subjectivities, to manage relationship between them and the human. So what we have here is that the shamans, they are the masters of cosmic schematism, dedicated to communicate and manage cross perspectives. They are always there to make the concept sensible or intelligible, the intuition. Shamanism is a kind of transversality. It do not correspond to an assimilation of the other, quite different from the perspective that you have when we mention cosmopolitanism. Usually we are talking a kind of a common assimilation. Since the perspectives are not equivalent, we are getting to this discussion now, but to the radical affirmation of the other as irreducible alterity. The alliance that the shaman enters into with others operates what Viveiros calls a contiguity at the borders. It is always transverse. No? Viveiros says the other of the other is always other. By seeing non-human beings, no, as themselves, as humans, shamans are able to take the role of the active interlocutor in a trans-specific dialogue. So I bring here one question that I think is quite interesting for us to discussion. I mean, could we be considered shamanism then in our Western vocabulary a kind of art of cosmopolitical, or a cosmopolitical art? Shamans are able to retell the story, something that lay people can hardly do. The meeting or exchange of perspective are a political art. We can say that's a kind of diplomacy. For the Amerindians, to know is to personify. Quite completely different from our way of representation in Eastern philosophy. To take the point of what must be known. If Western multiculturalism is relativism as a public policy, Amerindian shamanism is a multinaturalism as a cosmic policy. I would put in those terms. So, to say that animals and spirits are humans, and that's, I would say that we come to a crucial part of the idea of subjectivity in perspectivism, is when we deal with the relation with the idea of agency and bodification. No, that's quite fundamental. The first step is that if to say that animals and spirits are human, it is to attribute to the non-human the capacity of conscious intentionality and of agency that empowers the occupation of the initiative position of the subject. So, these abilities are ratified in the soul or spirit that these non-human are gifted. And now comes the crucial point. It is the subject, those who have a soul, and has a soul, those who are capable of a point of view. So, who has a soul is the one, is everything that has the capability to offer a point of view. So, in other words, every being to which a point of view is attributed will then be a subject, a spirit. We can say, in other terms, wherever the point of view is, there is also the subject position. So it's with that idea in mind that I come to the conclusion on the modification here, that in the Amerindian perspectivism, it happens according with the principle that the point of view creates the subject. It will be the subject who is activated or agenciated by the point of view. Animals and other beings endued with soul are not subjected because they are human. It's quite the contrary. They are human in the Amerindian perspective. Everything could be human in the Amerindian perspective because they are subjects. This means that culture is the nature of the subject. It is the way in which every agent experiences his or her own nature. Here, it's very important to make clear that indigenous animism is not a figurative projection of a substantive human qualities over non-humans. That's not what which animism is about, as we usually to take it. What expressed in animism here is a real equivalence between the relationships that human and non-humans maintain with themselves. Because if the condition common to human and animals is humanity, not animality, it is because humanity is the name of the general form of the subject. With that, we can somehow conclude that multinaturalism is perspectivism is not relativism, but it is multinaturalism. Multinaturalism is the way that we express nature in perspectivism. I'm quite coming to the end. Just let me finish with this idea. The idea of the world that comprises a multiplicity of subject positions could wrongly point to a notion of relativism. So there is a huge interpretation that perspectivism is just a new way of putting relativism. But if Amerindian perspectivism theory in fact assume a multiplicity of representation about the same world, is that really relativism? Viveiros says that it's exactly the opposite. All beings see the world in the same way. What changes is the world they see. Being people in their own department, no humans see things as people see, but the things they see are other. So, the point of view is given by the specificity of the bodies. A perspective is not a representation, because representations are properties of the spirit. A perspective is a point of view, and that's Deleuze here helps us a lot to get into that discussion, Latour and Deleuze, of course. A perspective is the point of view, and the point of view, it is in the body. Being able to occupy the point of view is undoubtedly a power of the soul. But the difference of views is given by the specificity of the bodies. And that's how, for the indigenous, it's so important that the graphic of the body, how the descriptions that you have in your body. So here, body is not seen a kind of a synonymous of biology, of characteristic anatomy. No, it's not a physiological thing. Body is, and Viveiros takes that really serious from the Amerindian, from the Arauté, is a set of manners or ways of being that constitute an habit. Which means, between the formal subjectivities of the soul and the substantiality, materialization of organism, Viveiros points that there is a central plan that it's the body, but the body here is a set of conditions and capacities. That's the origin of the perspectivism, no? And the difference of the bodies, however, is not apprehended from it needs to be apprehended from an external point of view. The bodies are ways that otherness is apprehended. We do not see in normal conditions animals as people, and reciprocally, they don't see us as animals as well, no? Because our respective bodies a difference. So the difference is named on the body. It is the body who determines the perspective that I'm taking from my world. No? And that brings me...
1 second, I will just... Could everyone who's not speaking right now please turn off their microphones, and then whenever you want to say something in the discussion, obviously you can turn it back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. So, to end up with, if the perspective is not a relativism, we could call it a relationism. No? They are points of view about things. The question is, therefore, not how monkeys see their world. That's not the point of perspective. But what world is expressed through monkeys, what world they are the point of view of. I want to finish with a Cacique Raoni statement when he says that while these imbalances remain veiled, the Western tradition will continue to understand the Amerindian only by the logic of the fault. That's not perspectivism. That's colonializing. No? And with that, we can assume some points that we could discuss in our conversation now. Which kind of humanism or ethics or idea of Anthropocene could be thinking with this philosophical vision? What the place of cosmopolitan shamanism with austerity or relationality brings something new to our discussion on relativism and multiculturalism. What about the dimension of nature as a subject of right? What about ecopolitics, abstract representation and cultural relativism? How this perspectivism could bring us new thoughts on it. And I begin with Viveiros, and I will finish with Viveiros, and a picture of one arete. Indianity, it's a project of the future, not a memory of the past. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you so much. This is, yeah. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Also, thank you so much for the different quotes and the different images that you shared with us. I think your presentation actually continues really well something that we were talking about in the last session, that Wamani will always be Wamani, no matter how the spirit manifests in the different dancers or in the different animals, their spirit will always be there. So this is how I understood that there's a universality of the same spirit, or we all share the same soul, like all beings share the same soul, right? Which is what Viveiros de Castro says. And then whichever being is not understood as a soul has not been interpreted enough yet, right? And then so yeah, I would like to open the discussion. You can all turn on your cameras, no matter if you say something or if you don't say something, just to see people's faces and to like create this little community for the reading group. Thank you. And then I would like to, yeah, you can start asking questions. I would just say, I think we should, as the shaman is translating from the spiritual world, I thought maybe Bethania, thank you for translating from the Amerindian world and cosmology and sharing that with us. So I think there's also a parallel process, maybe. I don't know if that makes sense, but in order for us, because we're always questioning our role as academics who want to understand, but it's also, I think, a process of translation of different worldviews, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Katarina. And how would you proceed? I mean, it's a back and forth. How is the discussion?
No, it's an open discussion. So if anyone has any questions, I also see that Gloria Chacon joined us. This is great. Everyone, like, I'm really happy to see all of you. I think some of you have already I know that some of you already have worked with Viveiros de Castro's texts. So please feel free, just go ahead and ask the questions or share your interpretations and readings. And if not, it usually people need a moment to let
I could imagine.
sink in. But you can also share what was new for you, or if you've never heard of this, and if not, I will obviously also share some of the thoughts I had during the readings.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm kind of new today, and I don't want to turn on my camera because no me he peinado. I haven't brushed my hair. So.
Don't worry. We're glad to have you. Gloria is also going to give a charla in one of the next sessions.
So thank you for that wonderful talk. I keep thinking about what would be the role of death, especially in relationship to hunting, and how does perspectivism play a role in maybe sort of rethinking what death means in that ontological relationship between humans and animals.
Thank you, Gloria. I mean, this is for me is the most challenging one. I have to confess, since you are a small group, it's a good thing about reading group, so you can share our challenges as well. I would say that for me, one of the most difficult parts to assimilate, because I mean, the whole perspective was quite a challenge. I do realize that I had a completely Occidental mind. It has been very difficult for me until today. Now I'm working with David Copenhauer's philosophy to make a connection with Viveiros de Castro, which is absolutely, I mean, it's a philosophical book, but I have to struggle with myself to change mythology into philosophy. That's why I put it that in the first place. But I think your question goes to what I would consider the most difficult part of assimilating from the perspectivism, and that's the idea of affinity and the relationship between the prey and the predator, right? So why I say that's a challenge, because I was doing all the efforts to switch, to torse a bit of Viveiros interpretations, because I was afraid to bring us to any kind of Jacobson interpretation of enemy theory, right? Or Smithian interpretation of the enemy. I mean, the enemy. What is the place of the enemy? Our whole Occidental tradition was to avoid or find a way to equalize or make justice and not let the pure predator-prey relationship take place. So, and that could be. I know that some people read Viveiros' interpretation of affinity in predator-prey and hunting relation as a quite clear predator-prey relationship, in the sense that it could lead us to think that the best one to express its corporeality, his corporeality, will be the one who's be the protagonist. So that could be a interpretation that I absolutely try to avoid, not but by dismissing it, but to showing how this framework is, where it is framed. I mean, where we have to put this logic of predator and prey inside the idea of affinity and familiarity, the family and the brother-in-law, as this figure who belongs and do not belong to the family. This kind of duality of belonging and not belonging, have something to share, but at the same time be potentially enemy, has become quite clear in the last works of Viveiros. That was not in Constância da Alma Selvagem, but in Metafísica Canibais, it comes to that point. And then, Gloria, we have the valorization of hunting, absolutely. This idea that you can express a point of view. But I would say that it's a good way to take it into an ethical step. I mean, that's the way I see it. What kind of ethics can we derive from this relation with death and life, with the relation of to be a I mean, first of all, I would answer a question with the idea of affinity. Affinity has to means both familiarity and potential enemy. But in a way, what is for them to build an alliance with the enemy? To have an enemy, of course, but to build an alliance. What is to be? What is an alliance? An alliance is the intentionality of bring the act of the other into the scene. It's the valorization of the act of the other. It's the way to push the other to express himself, to provoke a response. So we cannot take enemy out of the ethical picture, but in those terms, and that's quite. It's a quite delicate matter. The last one I would like to get into, but that's really crucial. And the other thing is that death is related with the predator-prey relationship and point of view. No? Antonio has asked here also the idea of point of view, no? The perspectivism as a point of view. So we really occupy a place in the cosmovision.
Dice Rey que sí pueden venir viernes. Ah, qué bueno. ¿Dije a las 7 está bien? Sí, está bien. Ya.
Ojalá que haga buen clima y podemos comer afuera de pronto. Estamos bonitos. Henry, ¿usted está hablando con nosotros?
¿Qué más?
Sí. Es que se escuchan voces y si no están hablando con Bethania, entonces quizás podemos callar los micrófonos por un momento.
Creo que no está escuchando. Qué bien que no habla español, Catarina.
Bueno. Okay, I think we can proceed. Thanks. No. I can't turn it off because I'm not the host. Elis is the host, so I can't turn off the different.
I think it's okay.
Sorry. Well, we'll try.
But it's a good way that I would finish here because then we can have other questions related with the. I didn't give up the theme of death. I think I didn't get to the whole picture of it, but I will save two other discussions. I don't know if Antonio wants to elaborate a little bit more on because the point of view is the whole idea of perspectivism. If he has something more specific to say, one thing that I didn't mention that I think is crucial because it's quite a complicated philosophy is the difference between species and conditions. I don't know if you read the text, if you are familiar with the Viveiros grammar, but that's quite crucial to understand how the perspectivism occupy a place in this idea of humanity, species as an ontological primacy. Because for the Amerindians, the common reference to all beings of nature is not man as a species, but humanity as a condition. And that he takes for for the anthropology of Decolonizing, no? The reference, the common reference of all beings of nature is not man as a species, but humanity as a condition. And for us, Occidentals, human species and the human condition necessarily coincides in extensionality. Why? In extension is equal, but in Western tradition, species have ontological primacy. So, rejecting the human, since Occidentals say that the species of human has ontological primacy, I mean, human beings as species has ontological primacy in our epistemology, right? We necessarily deny humanity to all other kinds of specific beings, because we have the ontological privilege of occupying the condition of species, right? In the indigenous case, it's quite the opposite. It is the condition of humanity that has primacy over the species. It's not the question of humanity. It's not that we are men, we are humans, but it's the condition of human. Are we capable of humanity? If you are, we have the condition of a person. So that's quite another wonderful discussion. To be a person is prior to be a human, It's a bit complicated. It's not an easy philosophy, but I didn't want to bring the debate in a superficial way. I thought it was more challenging even to bring the debate, since it was a small group, into a more intimate and complicated philosophical. But did you guys that the sense that the nature is printed in the body, is expressed, this subjectivity is expressed in the body?
Did you want to say something more about your question, Antonio?
Yeah, I mean, I've changed. Thank you, Bethania, again for the talk. I was wondering how, I mean, the question was about, you said that it was as humanity, in your talk, and not now, but you said before that as what is relevant is the point of view, the perspective of different beings, human beings and non-human beings, and that humanity is like something should be understood in a broad sense that human and non-humans are part of. And you say just it would be like culture would be the a priori, no, before nature, no. From that, I was wondering what kind of if the notions of morality or justice, of ethics play a certain role in perspectivism, because you said it's not relativism. I think you explained very well this. Now I was wondering how within perspectivism and multinaturalism, how do they relate with ethics, with morality? I don't know if those notions are useful, but you know, how do they relate with ethics and morality and justice? I don't know, this idea. Thank you.
No, Thank you, Antonio. First, just a quick note, just to make sure to answer properly the idea of the point of view, because the perspective is not a representation, because representations are in the spirit. You know? The perspective is the point of view, but in the body, You know? Being able to occupy a point of view means that you have the power. This soul has a power. That's why culture comes before nature. But the difference of views is not made by the spirit. It's made by the concreteness of the body. So that's absolutely crucial, and Deleuze helps us to really understand, because this is the inspiration. Of course, this is a philosophy who, and Katarina mentioned that in the beginning. It's a philosophy of translation. And Viveiros is trying to translate a whole domain, whole cosmovision into philosophical terms. Not that we are going to become Indians or indigenous, I'm sorry, but in the sense that what that brings to us. And that brings me to your question, which I think is absolutely crucial, because that's the way I take perspectivism. No, I mean, what perspectivism can really contribute to think in ethical terms, in terms of justice, in terms of including rights. No? I think we can have a philosophical discussion and what I would call a sociopolitical discussion. And I think perspectivism can fulfill both domains. In terms of a philosophical perspective, I would say that Viveiros says it is a relationism. No? If you assume the perspective of the other as otherness, and as otherness who has the same, let's say, ontological status, because Viveiros perspectivism is into this new frame called new ontologies. I mean, if you take his premises seriously enough, Nicolas, and you give I'm sorry, ontological high hierarchy, all the things that are able to stand as a point of view, we have a completely different idea of inclusion in ethics, that it's, in my view, far beyond pure abstract universality on one hand and pure relativism on the other hand. It is relationality, and to be there and the other to be there. I mean, it includes interperspectivisms. I mean, it includes that we have to precisely live with the other, inhabit this world with the otherness, but otherness that you don't have access, you cannot translate completely. I mean, you could say to me, no, Derrida has already talking about the impossibility of translations. No, I think that has a lot to do with Derrida in some sense. The limit of translation, you cannot translate it, but you have to take the point of view of a mountain, which is quite impossible to our perspective, and that comes to the political and social implications of it, as a subject. For the Indians, the river is a subject, not because they are pure representative animists, because they attribute to the perspective of the other. So to give human status to everything cosmologically has huge ethical implications, and at the same way do not assume that I understand completely and I can represent your world. I would say that by
Thanks. I'm gonna try this again. Henry Maqueda, could you please turn off your microphone? Sometimes it's difficult to understand Bethania. Henry? Well, I'm sorry. We'll just try to continue. But this is great. And what you just said, I think Viveiros de Castro says we can't think like them, but we can think with them, right? Like not como, mas con. So so I think this is a good way of trying to imagine these ideas of seeing the world. Although I feel like there's very often you know, also in other cultures or in other surroundings, in the rivers have personalities, and dead people show up in animals and personify in animals, even in Europe, and yeah, or animals are seen as family members, especially in the US. You know, dogs, everybody's treating their dog like a person. So so sometimes I feel like it might not be, you know, it's not, I mean, obviously the way of
Sí, vamos. Vámonos, pues. Pero estamos una hora. ¿Cómo
no, pero es que Henry Maquera, perdón.
Quiero quedarme allá esperando. Yo quiero, por eso me quiero ir antes.
Yo que Daniel, entonces, para decirle que hacer los que Daniel para.
Hola, la gente que esté hablando. Henry,
Sí,
Nicolás.
¿Yo, Nicolás?
Henry.
No, ya está la mesa puesta.
Ay, Dios mío.
Nico.
Okay. Anyways, let's try to continue the discussion. And sorry, this is usually not like this. And I think Amy had a question or a comment.
I think
We can't hear you, Amy. Also, your microphone is turned off.
How's that?
Great.
Okay, great. Déjame ir tan temprano, yo estoy temprano.
Should we do like a
I
different?
guess I'll just dive in.
What? Sorry?
Should we do like a different? Everybody, like,
Dime, Marta. Should we do a different Zoom?
like it, yeah, like I
Or
can.
maybe I can call Ilas and
You can call us and they can make you co-host, or they can make you host.
yeah, I'm gonna try that. They're not in this, so it's kind of difficult, but I'll try that real quick. Sorry, let's take a 5-minute break and come back in 5 minutes. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Tiene que ver, que es hermoso. Pero ella no. Sí, de ahí. No más difícil que va. Una utility, sí, una utility. Please don't how. Mr. Daniel Gaje? Okay. ¿Ah? En 5 minutos la pasas, por favor.
Hey, Mama.
Oh, I think he left. Amazing. So that did the trick. I was just opening another Zoom, so I think we can continue with the discussion.
I thought it was you.
Oh my God.
I thought it was you, Katarina, who managed to.
So no more migration needed at the moment.
Okay.
Amazing. Where were we?
I mean,
Amy.
you, Katarina, you just had mentioned that dogs. I mean, that would be not so different for us because we somehow we consider dogs kind of humans or part of the family, right? And I was thinking, I mean,
yes. Thank you so much, Esteban and Jali. Thank you. Perfect. Now I'm the host. So Amy, I think we can continue. You can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. Very excited.
I can't hear you. Now I can.
Okay. Is that working now? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Bethania, thank you so much for your presentation and for your article. I just wanted to congratulate you as someone who was maybe an early-ish reader of Viveiros de Castro in the United States. I thought that your articulation of multinaturalism in the context of all of these different Western thinkers that are very much in the mainstream was extremely useful to me. And particularly sort of referring back to Antonio's questions about morality and ethics, the articulation of the radical performative ethics via Roy Wagner's work, the idea that what perspectivism can do for decolonization of thought is this sort of dislocation of the relationship between self and other from the other as sort of the straw man that allows the affirmation of the self almost through negation, right? To this idea of the concretization of the self via or by way of the perspective of the other. That particular way of using Wagner was incredibly helpful to me in thinking through what perspectivism can do for ethics and morality. So I just wanted to thank you for this wonderful article.
Thanks a lot, Amy. I mean, you just mentioned a very crucial point that I didn't make clear in the presentation. And I think it really is related with the ethical question that Antonio mentioned before, is that this, I really aim it to extract an active dimension of Viveiros. I mean, for me, in that sense, I'm quite Occidental. I want an ethical dimension. I want a horizon of respect and equality. So I'm not putting that into question, but really to break it's a formalism as the Neo-Kantian tradition has put it, right? But I have the same preoccupation. When you mentioned the idea of concretization of yourself through the other, and that's the main point of the way I see, and Decolonize is absolutely crucial. I agree with you. And it's because in the perspectivism idea, you only see yours as the same. I mean, through us, we only see sameness. That's why it's crucial to see from a perspective that external to ourselves as humans. the idea to get out of ourselves as a human, it's essential to concretize ourselves, because the idea of perspective is not only the kind of respect, each one respect his perspective in a very philosophical, strong sense. In order to be, the other has to be. But the other has to be much more than in a Hegelian sense. The other has to be because I need to see the other in its completely otherness, not in a sharing common horizon, but in its completely otherness, in order to see myself. And that brings us to the Katarina has mentioned before that we could see dogs as a person, which is quite tricky, no? Because we can make the animals humans. But I would give the question back to you. I don't know if you want to be called Katarina, Catherine, or Katarina. I want to name people for the right name. What do you? How would
you? No. I mean, written in a Portuguese way, so just say the Portuguese way.
Catarina, Portuguese, okay. Because in that example, we are making the dog humans. We are not, I mean, that's we who are deciding. We are not taking the perspective that the completely otherness of the other, it's essential to concretize myself and my sense of otherness. Because this whole idea that it's not that we are getting to the other. That's the tricky thing. We are not getting into the meaning, the excess, the substance of the other. So,
I would say that in the chat, she just wrote, "How does the dog see me?" So what do we look like as a? But I just said this because of the statement that there's a human essence in every animal, you know, and then there's also maybe animalistic traits in a person. We have to reconfirm our humanity, our humaneness every time we act. So we have to act as humans. Or being human, as if I understood you right, maybe I can ask you this: what is human? What does being human mean? So I think what you said was it's the manners and the way we behave, right, and the habits, etc. So that is what makes us human. So do we behave in humane ways?
In Viveiro's perspective, that's a quite a fundamental question. I mean, to be human is to be now, humanity, it's a cosmological, let's say, background. Humanity is a cosmological background. This is why culture comes before nature, which is so complicated in the first approach. But humanity, it's a common ground. The animals lost the appearance of humanity. Okay, I mean, until now could be figurative. I mean, what we do with that sort of, but then the ability to be a person is the capacity to take a point of view. And to take a point of view it has to be shaped in the bodies, in the way that otherness is apprehended. So otherness is only apprehended in the body.
I think it's easy to understand this if we think of this whole concept of predator and prey, right? Because exactly. Some things are seen as food, some like animals are seen as food by other animals, and then human beings see some animals as food and some as enemies, and humans are seen as food by some animals but not by others, etc. So I think that is, but then maybe that sounds too relativist. I don't know. But also, like everyone else, please, you can ask questions all the time. Join into the discussion.
Yeah, yes, Amy, that's precisely. to occupy the position of a human is be capable of enacting the first person position. That's one thing that I would say is that, I mean, it's not that we are going to even to completely change our way of seeing nature and culture. That's not what, for me, perspectivism is about. It's about to be able to inscribe the way we see nature and culture. It's not even to switch and to have an Indian mind. So I don't share with them. I have, not that I don't share, but I have problem with this idea sometimes taken from the colonial perspective that, okay, now I will close my eyes to Western tradition and I will go back to Amazonian and spend 2 months trying to behave and be like an Indian. It would never will happen. So, and change completely my vocabulary, not be Occidental. I mean, I have to take Kant for my mind, Hegel, Hannah Arendt, I mean, whatever, I mean, in order to be decolonizing. I would say that the Brazilian has a very good word for that, and then the translation not so good because it could mean something else, but to have a kind of anthropophagical relation with the Western tradition, huh? To deal with that, and for me, perspectivism helps me to develop new tools into the Western tradition. It's not that we are going to now to put everything aside and say, let's base it a completely new. There is no new from the beginning, from the scratch. The new has to be from where we are. The position, the position my body is occupying right now in Rio de Janeiro, in the middle of the worst side of the pandemic ever in the whole world. So that's my position, and that's the position perspectivism has to be taken. But of course, for that, we have to be able to understand the perspective in his peculiarities, the philosophical peculiarities. But once we do that, the next step at what to do with that thinking, how it helps me to do more justice, to understand, to include the other, to challenge abstract universality, to challenge ecocide. I mean, how does it help us? And I think it helps in many, many different ways. For instance, just to give a brief example, if you see the decolonial, I mean, you I know that you are familiar with that, but just to mention this idea that they use multiculturalism a lot to deal with decoloniality. So they use quite a lot. But multiculturalism, it's taken from the position of who? Who decides the framework of multiculturalism? Who decides what is natural or what is cultural in multiculturalism? And multiculturalism, if we take, like, for instance, Wendy Brown's standpoint, it has already a priority, an epistemology priority, a hierarchy between the cultures. I mean, there is no neutrality when you put multiculturalism in one package. We have to assume that, and that point I don't agree with Sheila Ben Habib. I agree with many things, but we have to take the ground in which cosmopolitics and multiculturalism is grounded, in the sense that it's political and epistemological imbalances between the way they describe cultures. So multinaturalism could help us maybe to do what I told that I'm trying to do in the beginning, which I'm not capable of, to read David Schopenhauer's The Falling of the Sky as philosophy and not as mythology, as my eyes can see. Because I keep reading and I keep seeing myth. I don't see philosophy because I don't have eyes to see philosophy. And to develop eyes to see, I mean, yes, Sunday was the Brazilian festival of documentary. And the festival ended with a documentary with David Schopenhauer called The Last Florist. And I was making such an effort to see cosmology as a philosophical perspective. But my eyes, my mind, and my understanding was seeing beautifully put kind of anemic manifestations and mythology. And I was not seeing philosophy when, for instance, he was describing the woman who lives in the waters, and she came out to talk with her husband and took her husband inside the water. I was like, okay, this could be a romance, could be a legend, but how see that as a way of being in the world, in dealing with nature. But then when you see him speaking Sorbonne, in the end of the commentary, he was like there speaking in Sorbonne, saying, we are living in the Amazonian forest for 10,000 years without changing anything, maybe living in peace with nature. And we see the way we live with nature, destroying the Anthropocene, no? With Latour's idea of the end of the Anthropocene, no, the age of the Anthropocene. And then you see the way we destroy everything. How do you say it? He said a very beautiful phrase, the Occidental man dreams with commodities. We dream with commodities. We are commodity persons. So, and then helps me to see how it would change our way of dealing with nature. For instance, just to see something that's on the table of any of our agenda regarding climate change and so on. But not because we are going to turn into indigenous. We are not going to be indigenous.
I think Marta has a question. I also wanted to say right now, because if I may, Marta, just quickly, because you mentioned philosophy and how Viveiros de Castro obviously reads Schopenhauer and Krenak, and you were quoting Cacique Raoni and so on. And I think all these people would have to be equally positioned between Deleuze and Latour, etc. You know, so it would be like they all form the thought of Viveiros de Castro, so they would all have to be in the same page on the PowerPoint presentation, basically, right? They're all philosophers.
Absolutely.
I mean, sorry, yeah, you can answer, sorry.
No, sorry, Marta, please, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Marta.
Okay. Thank you for this presentation. And so I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of like how, like, you know, it's like that like meeting of the worldviews where like there's certain things that you might be able to understand of the other worldview and certain things not. And specifically in your case, you were talking about mythology. And so I was only able to read the first chapter of Viveiros, but but like what struck me in a certain way is that like he was using like European like tools in a certain way to understand like the indigenous worldview. And it's like it reminds me like I was thinking like I was in this like training once and there was this white woman in the training, and she was trying to understand the perspective of people of color. And so the way that she did that was like accessing the fact that she was working class. Okay, and so like being working class was kind of made her other in the university in a certain way. So it's like that's kind of what this reminded me of in a certain way, that okay, so he had to use the tools that he had, which were like, you know, European thinkers to figure this out, you know, in a certain way. And so like, I mean, I think for me, like what I find fascinating about it is just like to study it as like, you know, well, what bridges was he able to make? Like, how did he use these tools to understand this? Because he obviously did in a lot of ways. So anyway, that was just my comment.
Yes, no, I know. Thank you, Marta. I know what you mean, and I think I mean, I think we really need to face this question on how to what kind of position we are going to take in terms of who can speak and who cannot speak, and when can one speak, or and I am afraid that I'm quite I mean, I lived 6 years in the United States, and I don't think that model of identity politics is at least what I would have in mind in terms of who can speak and what the position. And I'm quite suspicious of what is kind of happening in Brazil right now, that we are kind of I wouldn't say copy, but mm, I mean, how can I say that without saying the way that I don't want to say? I mean, but then I know I guess that you know what I mean. I mean, in the sense that even, I mean, I could say I am a Brazilian talking about Viveiros de Castro, but I am quite not indigenous Brazilian. If I have to take very seriously the position point, I not even Viveiros, he was an anthropologist, and he, even David Copenauer was the first indigenous who wrote what he called a kind of philosophical cosmopolitan vision of his philosophy, but he was helped by an anthropologist in a way. And even Viveiros used many European authors to build his philosophy. So my position is I don't have a radical position. I have a quite flexible position in the sense of taking responsibility, of course, for the place where you are. And I know that I would never be able to fully represent them. But I am someone doing philosophy and trying to make my best to recover this philosophy using the tools that I have to use, that I can use. So that's my place, and I have to recognize that I occupy this place, not the place of the one who's going to speak of the perspective of the other. So, and I think that's very important. But this idea of who speak cannot make me not to speak, I think, in anyone, I would say. That's the position that I think we need to be able to develop, to give a kind of a step further this idea that if you only can speak about things that you lived yourself. So I don't know how you guys see this. That's a very huge discussion in the colonial studies, and I am quite critical. I think we have to open the discussion and bring the discussion to a different levels. Of course, take into account the position of who speaks, but letting everyone speak if they assume the premises and do construct a violent answer and so on, and violence and so on and so forth. So, but I don't know if I got to it was really a question, Marta. And I think it's a challenge, but we are in the middle of it. So we are kind of responsible for taking that responsibility to speak out, I would say. Even taking into account, for instance, I'm a Brazilian, and I cannot avoid that I'm part of the structural racism. The structure I am involuntarily part of. Brazil has a racist structure, period. That's a fact. I'm part of it. Yes, I am part of it. No matter if I want or if I not, yes, I can involuntarily reproduce racism. Yes, and I have been very, very, very careful not to do that. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to be able to speak. I would take as a grant. That's my position.
I think we have time for one last question, Amy. And if anyone else would like to say something, maybe we should assemble the questions now. If someone else has another comment, if not, we can go ahead with Amy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to cede the floor if anyone else would like to. I was
I just had a brief comment, but you can go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to that last conversation a bit, thinking about also the relationship between Western philosophy, Western metaphysics, and perspectivism that you brought up, Bethania, when you said you didn't, I'm sorry, my dog would like a tree, that you didn't promote the idea of, you know, going native, say, and just forgetting about Western philosophy, that the goal is more to create a conversation between the two and what can be brought right from that conversation. In another place, Viveiros de Castro has said that perspectivism has a model, an intrinsic model, right, for these kinds of relations. And where I'm thinking of, he was speaking specifically about anthropology, right, that perspectivism itself has a model for a renovated anthropology because Amerindian perspectivists are sort of inherently anthropological in that they always wonder what the other thinks, how the other thinks, and how the other sees them. So it's this sort of reciprocal anthropology. Mm-hmm. And I think we can think about that in terms of, you know, Western metaphysics as well. Like, what can perspectivism bring to Western metaphysics is this idea that the other thinking has a point of view, right? And that the other sees Western metaphysics as well. And that by putting them into sort of this relational conversation, which is a very perspectivist way of looking at it, that's where the you know, sort of more fruitful endeavors can arise.
Thank you, Wami.
Gloria, would you like to make your comment?
Sure. I mean, I was just going to say something that maybe is in conversation with what has already been said, but I think that Viveiros de Castro was not necessarily writing to indigenous peoples in Brazil, that he's writing to a Western kind of reader, and that, you know, we kind of have to think relationally, and I think that's where the invitation is.
No, absolutely, Gloria. He says that mainly. It's very interesting because I mean, the Ariete doesn't need his philosophy anyway, right? I mean, you are totally right. On the other way, I think he's quite responsible because in terms of politics to protect the Indians, he's always in the first place. I mean, he's absolutely political, committed to I mean, you guys have been following up the genocide government that we have here in Brazil regarding the indigenous communities, and he's quite active on that. In the other sense, he felt uncomfortable. That's why he promoted David Schopenhauer and helped David Schopenhauer's philosophies, written in the preface of the book, saying that this is the first philosophy, indigenous philosophy, written by an indigenous, and that's absolutely crucial. So the thing that Viveiros is representative of creating a new philosophy from the perspective of the Western philosophy, reading the Ariete philosophy, doesn't substitute at all the philosophy made by the own indigenous. Help us to translate somehow, but you are right. It's absolutely crucial that we have both. I would say.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is a nice last point, right? This is also what I was trying to say about us as academics trying to translate from one worldview to another, and this is where Viveiros de Castro is helping us, while Schopenhauer, etc., are helping him to understand the worldview in the first place. So I think, so we're all helping each other. And Bethania, thank you so much for helping us understand Viveiros de Castro. And I think this has been a beautiful discussion. Let me just finish with announcing the next one, which will be on May 4th, on the poetics of personhood Thought, Work, and Liberation. And this is going to be prepared by Ronald Briggs from Barnard College, who's usually also part of this group, but couldn't take part today. And he will make us read 4 different readings: Imani Perri, Clorinda Mato de Chorner, Vanessa Miseres, and Mio Vestrini. And I'll send them, as always, in the emails. And if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Now I'm a host, so we won't have any more problems. Thank you so much for being patient with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Katarina. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you all.
It really was a pleasure, Bethania. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a beautiful evening or afternoon wherever you are.